Okay, hi to everyone joining this live stream. We are talking about things to do with the rendering of trees. So, where should we start?
Right. So, oh, go ahead, Noah.
Well, no, I was just going to say that we had done sort of, I guess, a quick review of this UX at the end of an ILD meeting. And so this meeting is about sort of going through this whole proposal properly.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a view for trees, which was just TreeOutline. In the previous meeting, we discussed that there could be other layouts as well, but we're starting with this one.
Do we think this is the only tree outline, or do we think there would be many tree outlines?
So we also have John at this meeting for TreeView.
So what is TreeView versus tree outline?
So I mean, this is something that I just rolled together a quick proposal for. The interesting thing that I wanted to focus on here is the possibility that you might want to view something as a tree that's not a fully realized expression. So the interesting thing about tree views is that you can compute them lazily. You know, they can be closed, and you can. Sorry, did you?
I reevaluated.
Yeah, I'd say I had something.
Okay.
Well, in any case, yeah. Oh, yes, that's right. I think it was just something that displayed the associations. But so, like, imagine, for example, the tree view on a file browser. You probably haven't, thought about it maybe as much quite in this way because you use Mac more, but on Windows, you often see these tree views, and the contents of a closed item are computed when you open it. And that way you can have a tree view that represents an entire file system, but you don't have to wait to scan the entire file system to show the tree view.
Right. Well, and the same could be true of our both. I mean, for example, with graphs. Well, for instance, in find replace path and other kinds of things that we're looking at for this multi-computation project, it's the same story. That is that you might have, a game graph, and you don't actually compute the structure of the game graph until you've explored down to that game configuration.
Wonderful. Wonderful. I'm glad to hear that you're thinking of other applications too. So the reason I wrote this up is because, the first 4 patterns there are kind of obvious. It's the 5th one that's really interesting to me. Tree view of a function.
I'm not sure that's the right way to do it, though, because I think that
it might not be, but something that allows.
This is exactly like
so I think essentially the function that you want to specify is the function that we have in nest tree.
Yes.
A function that takes the current state and gives the list of child states.
Right. Although with this aware thing that we've been just talking about, you could have those child states depend on further context. Right? I mean, normally, like a nest graph, you are purely computing the next states, plural, from the current state. But like the past states, the stack of states is irrelevant. But with aware, for example, the stack of states could be
for example.
I mean, the concept for John and other people's benefit of this aware function, I'm not sure it's the right name, but I kind of like that name. It's situational awareness. Is you would say something like map, and then the default form, you would say index plus, stack or something, list, something like this, comma expression. And that would, do you get what this is? Did you get the concept, John?
No, that would do what?
Well, so think of map indexed, okay?
Mhm.
So in this case, map of aware of, let's say the map index was going to be, f of the index position, comma, the expression.
Okay.
That would be equivalent to map indexed of f of first of #2, comma #1.
Okay.
Isn't that a cool idea?
Mhm.
Okay, but that's a way to generalize. That's a way to not worry about the fact that normally in this, this is a quintessential multi-way system story. I mean, there is a question when you generate those tree elements of whether you should merge identical elements that you generate, right? Because that's an issue. If you're generating a tree, and like, for example, a quintessential case would be okay, will be something like this, right? It's a tree, except it isn't a tree, because there are two different ways to reach the 4. Does that make sense?
Right. Well, yes, I'm very familiar with this because this comes up in when you're constructing directed acyclic word graphs for word games. That which is, I mean, their dictionaries are it's the same concept for spell checking dictionaries. Is that you're just following nodes of the graph as you're going through the letters of the word, but if if every terminal node were unique, the thing would be huge. So you just share the nodes at the bottom where they're identical. And
that where it got to the same word, where the different spellings got to the same word.
No, where it got to the same terminal. And so a node that is like ends here or can take an S and then ends. That node is shared everywhere. But that would be different from ends here, can take an S and then ends, or can take an S or can take a D and ends. Those are different nodes. So something that only takes an S at the end is going to end up in a different node than something that can take an S or a D.
Huh. That's interesting. Okay.
And it's just basically a way of packing the dictionary, because if you didn't pack the dictionary, it would just take a pretty large amount of memory. But when you pack it in is certainly in the English language and in many other languages too, it packs down really very nicely.
All right, but so the issue for TreeView is, what does it do when these things get shared?
I think we don't want to have sharing for the TreeView.
Well, I mean, if it's a tree, no, obviously not. But that's the case. Okay.
But can you do nest tree with the same arguments? Get rid of the vertex labels. What on earth?
Well, I mean, this is running in version 13.1, so I have no idea what that means. I can try it in version 13. Okay, something's wrong in 13.1.
So the point is, in like a file system, if you had files with the same name in different directories, you don't want to share those.
Okay. Well, unless there's symbolic links and things. Mm-hmm. Okay. There's a bug you should be aware of, but all right. So let's come back over here. I mean, what about expression view? What about the illusion of expressions, which we've discussed for like 25 years or more? Right. So I generate a complicated expression. Let's say I have, Oh, for goodness sake, not this silliness again. We have to fix this. I hope this is getting fixed for. Okay. All right. So in an expression like this, I should be able to see an elided form of this and then click to drill down. Am I making sense? You understand what I'm saying?
Like an interactive short.
Yes, that's what we've discussed for like 25 years, right? I mean, this is a tree structure. You should be able to elide it down and then see it. So what you're proposing here, and what I think John has here is, he's got an association version of this. Another version of this that we already have is in Dataset. Am I making sense?
Yep.
So what's the commonality between these different forms? I think I should look at your actual design here. And is this design is quite separate from the TreeView design over here, correct?
So, I was just suggesting a syntax which could which could look like this, but that doesn't mean that it would necessarily be the most elemental thing that looks like this.
Looks like what? Looks like this over here?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So we have an issue that, having something that behaves like, that looks like and behaves like what you're seeing on the left is not so easy to do. And so we may have to actually create a new box in the front end to do this.
Okay.
And then I was just imagining kind of, what, so there's the box and then there's the things you would build on top of the box, right? And so I was imagining, actually, I take that back. Actually, I think the thing on the right was what I was imagining being the most elemental version, and then you could build things on top of it.
Why is this? I don't understand why this is. Oh, this is successive instances of the trio.
Correct. Yeah.
And how does this relate either functionally or graphically to the dataset opening?
So if you scroll down, I think it's in the elision section. Yeah. So we looked at essentially combining the elements of the UX from dataset with this. So it says keep scrolling, and then if you, for example, open that. So we've taken the breadcrumb trail, we've taken the drilling down, we've taken, well, you can see what elements we've taken there.
Okay. Okay. All right. So let's zoom out here for a second. Right. I mean, to me, one of the things that I react to not so positively is the kind of seeming preciousness of but maybe I'm just incorrectly reacting, of this kind of structure. It's like, well, this is one particular graphical way you could represent it, but there are a million others. And that, an example of that is the pure opener type mechanism here.
So one advantage of a more uniform representation is that you can build a pretty obvious keyboard accessibility on top of it. And for many things, maybe you don't care about keyboard accessibility, but let me tell you that when it's useful, boy, it's really useful.
Well, so what are you saying? So you're saying I could type J to get to the Jupyter cell here?
And you can, go around using arrow keys, right to open, left to close, up and down to navigate.
Mm-hmm. I bet I've never discovered those for the, file browsers that I use, but okay.
I'm not saying that's an absolutely killer feature, but it is interesting.
Yeah. But I'm trying to think. I mean, so let's say you've got a big XML tree. Is this going to be a good representation of it? I mean, don't you need to be able to say, I don't understand this? So I mean, if I were to take, okay, first of all, do we even have a function that that basically goes from a data set to a tree?
So we will add support for that in expression tree. So you'll do expression tree of a data set and you'll get something that looks like that outline there.
Okay. Which outline? This one here?
Yes. A tree with data like that using like keys as payloads.
Okay, but I mean, why isn't that displayed by default as a standard green tree type thing?
I would just say in general, displaying a file system or a large XML document as a graph is just not very helpful, but an outline where you can open and close things.
Right, but the question is, there's a sort of smoother way to get to that by having some, max tree size for this kind of tree. And I mean, there's nothing that says you can't have a tree that is displayed like this. Well, I don't know. I mean, where you could open things by clicking on elements of the graphically arranged tree.
Yeah, but that's going to be way less useful, right? Because it'll have to rearrange the whole tree as opposed to just the spot where you are.
It would either have to rearrange the whole tree, or it would have to come up with the arrangement in advance, which might look insane when everything's closed up.
Yeah, okay, fine.
And I think it's there are at least two use cases. Maybe let's call them out explicitly. One is visualization, and the other is drill down.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and this thing allows multi-drill down. Is that true?
Yes.
You can open up multiple pieces.
Yes, but if you drill down everything in a big, in a big graph, it becomes progressively less useful. In the same way that on the visualization side, if you have a big thing and you just visualize everything, it becomes progressively less useful.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So just for some reason, this appearance just seems seems very precious
but one of the nice things about this form of drill down, as opposed to the other form that you mentioned, is that you can undrill.
I know.
So that's, as I say, it gets progressively more difficult to use the more things you open up, but you can close the things you're no longer interested in, or you realize that were just a mistake.
Right. What would be a way?
I think the opening and closing are separate from drilling down. So you can open and close everything that's visible independently. And I think that's what you were calling drilling down. I was thinking drilling down is like in Dataset when you click on a key, like a sub key, and it shows you just the data set, that sub data set. And here there's a way to show just some subtree, which is distinct from the opening and closing behavior.
Yeah, you double click on either a node or a leaf to drill down to it. And then you get the breadcrumb trail at the top.
That is weird.
What?
I think that's weird. I mean, I can't think of a tree-like view.
It's the equivalent of opening a folder in a file explorer.
Well,
rather than just from outside opening a bunch of
right, but that's not right.
Can you scroll down so we can see an example?
I mean that's a distinct view in the file browser, right? You have the show me just this folder, and when I double click, open that folder, and then there's show me the file system tree. And, I can right arrow and left arrow to open subfolders, but,
Well, so for Dataset, there's a way to do this that doesn't require you to extract a subtree and then visualize that separately. You just click on something.
Right. Well, yeah, I guess I would, you know, and I would be concerned about the discoverability and, you know, how do you go back?
Noah has a design for that.
Going back, yeah, the going back mechanism isn't too bad. If you scroll down, keep going. There you go. Okay, so any of those will do. The node that's essentially become sort of the root of that view now has a little back icon. So if you click on that, you go back a level. And then you also got the breadcrumb trail at the top, so you can immediately go to whatever level in that path that you want to.
But there are also common controls in a file explorer.
Okay, we got three things here. We've got tree exploration, we've got data set exploration, and we've got expression exploration, which in a little bit of which you're doing over here. So, go ahead.
So can I just ask, is there supposed to be a back icon I can see? Is it just too small for me to see on my screen? Because I don't see a back icon.
There's a less than sign there.
Ah, okay.
Okay.
It also has a little piece of branch coming out of it to the left as well to sort of show that it's a piece.
Maybe you can bump up the magnification.
I'm trying to, but for some reason this cell is refusing to magnify. I thought you could type command on a command plus on a cell and have it magnify. Is that not the case?
It changes the font size, but if the cell has internal font sizes set, it's not a magnifier. It's just a font size thing. So.
Right. If you, I assume that's some sort of screenshot. So if you right click on it, right, there should be a way to, or maybe just click on it, right? There should be the.
Okay. There you go.
Thank you.
Okay.
Wow, that still looks like a C to me. Although I guess having been told that it's a go back, that's a pretty subtle.
We can deal with that.
You could only get into this state by having clicked on the node to begin with.
Right, but I just want to come back to this question about an expression, a large expression that would have like potentially be shown with the output limiter or be shown with short. Doesn't it have exactly the same issue as this? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Right. Well, in principle, yes. Right. We don't even try to solve that problem at the moment, right?
I know, but we've been talking about that for years.
I guess different expressions will have different natural representations. An array is more like a data set, but a tree is more like this, and something intermediate will be something different.
Okay. But even a data set, even the concept of auto shortening, that is that we have a like in the output limiter, where a particular piece of the expression has been, shortened, but you can't yet click on the elided part in the middle. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like if I were to make here something where I say short like that, right? This incredibly ancient thing should be clickable somehow. Am I making sense?
Yes, but this feels very different. You'd want a completely different layout, surely, to what you've got on the left.
Well, I know, but the difference is this is a long linear structure that you want to see more of. This is mostly a tree drill down structure that you want to see deeper of, so to speak. Here you want to see longer of it. Here you want to see deeper of it, usually. The interface you're providing here is a deeper interface, right? Insofar as you're providing a longer interface, it's only through the scrolling mechanism. Am I making sense?
Correct. I mean, there are ways of increasing that sort of scroll bar, the sort of max item size or image size. But yes, I agree.
Okay.
But that's why I was saying that they feel like different things. And so that
well, no, I'm trying to unify the concept. I'm trying to understand that because for an expression there is also tree-like drill down in some cases. An expression that is, for example, the the tree expression from a tree will be a heavily drillable object. Whereas a long list, a long array, a long list here is a readily extrudable object, if I'm making sense.
Yeah.
You want to see more of it that way, as opposed to drill down into it by opening subparts. So what you're providing here is primarily an interface for opening subparts, except for the scrolling part. Right? So what I'm trying to understand, what is the global, because you're talking about TreeView, which is for expressions, but in a sense, there's also a kind of an elided view in which, for example, things like this should happen. Does that make sense?
Right. Well, I think one of the issues is, how you want to, right, we're looking at sort of the two extreme simple cases of, well, you have a flat array of atoms, a flat list of atoms, and sort of something that are very bushy trees. In a lot of expressions, it's context and user dependent which way you want to drill down and how you want to allow.
I agree. Like, look at this one. I mean, you could either have said X arrow. Well, we could have either done the thing that is essentially, this is a good example of different kinds of drilling. I mean, so here, for example, I might have said just this, and I might have said, oh, I don't want that. I want to drill down inside here. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is a fine top-level representation of the result. It's good, actually. But it's a question of how the drilling works. And right now, the drilling doesn't work here, which I find fairly annoying.
Also, it's difficult to work out how you go back up as well. So if you'd open something,
well, it would obviously have to have its own little X or something in the top right-hand corner.
Yes, yeah. But I mean, how? Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just wondering how far you go, because then could you collapse the entire thing as well? Would the whole thing be framed? That whole list be framed as well, and you could sort of get all the way back to the state of, like, you could just see the root.
Yeah, just one blob, so to speak, for the whole thing.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. So,
well, I mean,
sort of like one little iconized. Yeah.
I mean, then you still have to decorate the whole thing, frame it.
Right. So what you're saying is that
thing.
could be something like an elided view, which you're saying is orthogonal to what you were talking about today, primarily. You're saying
yes. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's concentrate on.
But I also think it's interesting and worth. It does feel different, though, especially because of the sort of free form layout of it as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So let's look at your trees here. Okay. So the name is questionable. Tree outline. So wait a minute. There are how is this accessed? Is this a
currently the idea is you'd say tree outline of a tree object.
As opposed to a rendering option.
And since 12.3, if you do tree outline of a tree object, it returns a nested OpenReview. And this is a new design for what tree outline should return.
But what if you wanted, is it feasible to want something which is displayed as a graphical tree down to the leaf 14 or something, or node, whatever, at which it is displayed as one of these things, for which it would make more sense to have it be an option for a tree, how it is displaying itself.
Are you saying the thing about having like openers in the graph view?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Is that crazy?
Well, that's what we said earlier. I think it's harder and not necessarily what we want right away for XML and other things.
Right. Ian, I think he's making a different suggestion that, the bottom level, rather than just cutting off at the bottom level becomes one of these tree outlines.
Yes. Right. But I'm saying that it's a different thing. If you say tree outline or tree view, and I don't know the difference between those, and that's very confusing. of a whole tree, that is bank switching the whole tree to be, shown in this way, which seems different. And I'm asking, is it something where you want to be able to incrementally show this? Do you get what I'm saying?
To have both aspects of a graph and this kind of outlined view in a single visualization.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. But let's look. Okay, let's look at what you're doing here.
Also,
it might work if instead of it sort of having to rearrange the tree, it sort of popped out, and you sort of got the OpenerView.
I see. On top
attached. On top, yeah. That's the only way I can think of that working without it being really frustrating. Well,
no, I agree. It's got to not.
Yeah.
Right. It's got to pop on top rather than it's a popover, not a
exactly
the thing that rearranges. So, what's the relationship between TreeOutline and TreeView?
Right. So TreeView is a control, right? So it's you give it some information, and then the front end can take over. TreeOutline actually converts a tree into some other representation.
Which, by the way, uses a TreeView, probably.
Correct.
And why is it that TreeView, given a tree, doesn't just become the viewer? Well, you're saying it does down here.
Yes.
Right, but yes, it could definitely do that, but it wouldn't. Right, it wouldn't sort of do.
Why wouldn't it do exactly the same thing? I mean, we cannot have both a function called TreeOutline and a function called TreeView. That's not a possibility. So I don't understand why TreeView isn't basically. I mean, this is essentially a control, isn't it?
Yeah. So I mean, I'm not necessarily going to claim that TreeView is the name that we must be wed to, but I do think that there should be a thing which maps to what we do in the front end.
Okay, well, fine.
And the TreeView, as I documented it, was my initial proposal for a thing that does that.
Okay, I wouldn't have been able to figure out from the name TreeOutline that what it does is this. I mean, a tree browse seems a little bit closer. Or tree browser.
I mean, the inner file viewer, isn't that the file outline? Isn't that what you sort of get?
Is that what it's called? I didn't know that's what it's called.
I don't think I've ever encountered the term file outline.
I would expect it to be an outline of an individual file.
Right.
Don't you just say tree, and in certain contexts you expect it to look like this outline?
Yeah, but what do you? Yes, but what we're proposing
in a terminal is just going to output something that looks like this. It's kind of us who's saying that tree visualizes as a tree graph as opposed to an outline.
Okay, but I don't call this an outline. It's not,
and that's like what. So what? How does the name TreeView communicate that it renders as?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't.
It's
not a good name. It's not a good name because TreeView suggests that it is, in fact, other than the hint from the word view, it suggests that it looks like a tree, which is this graphical thing that we're showing above.
Right, and also with tree browse, I think there's other notions of browsing. Like you might want to have, instead of things nested, have them side by side as you're drilling down.
Well, I agree, although that might be an option. I don't think it's a very good look. TreeOutline is not a good name, and TreeView is not a good name for this thing. What is this thing? I mean, I don't know. The UX literature may have a name for it, but what is it? And
the reason I use TreeView is because that's what Microsoft calls, the actual widget itself, a TreeView.
Okay. But I don't think, I mean, the question is, what is the natural name for this object? Okay, but anyway, we don't know its name, but it is some function, tree something or other, and perhaps that function has a mirror in the front end, although I don't understand why the functionality needs to be different. So if this was called tree browse, that would be called tree browse view or something in the front end. I don't really understand why these have to be different. But then we're asking, what is the functionality over here of, I mean, this functionality looks pretty nice. I mean, I don't know what happens if these things are graphics that are bigger, for example. Am I making sense?
Right. Say if you tried to do an outline of a CSG region tree.
For example, yes. Where, and I don't know how the, for example, if I was going to do this from a raw expression, I guess I have the exact same issues as expression tree of how do I go from the expression to a tree?
Yeah, we just want to provide as many built-ins for converting expressions into trees.
Right. And then what you're saying is that this, given that you converted the expression to a tree, if you just say, show me the tree, it will come out in graphical form, you know, like green, you know, I don't know what we want to call it, but
well, that's what it currently does.
I know that's what it currently does. And so then
I'm not expressing an opinion on whether it should do that by default or not.
Right, but it would be nice if whatever was returned by XML import was something. I mean, this is clearly a much more useful way to return. The data structure is still a tree. So that's why this wrapper, it's unclear to me whether it should be a wrapper or an option. Because, for example, the XML import could return just a communal garden tree, like, you know, a tree that grows in a communal garden, so to speak, but with an option that causes it to be displayed in this, what is this display? This is a kind of line listing. It's a textual tree display in some sense. It's well, it's almost a vertical tree display. It's a chapter and section. You know, it's an open close tree display.
Right. Another criticism of the name tree outline is that, you know, notebooks form an outline, but they are completely different than this.
Well, right. But this is, you know, one question would be if I read in a notebook object and then I tree viewified it, what will I see? And that would be a good example of something like the XML tree of kind of, you know, what, you get what I'm saying?
Well, I mean, it depends on, you know, what sort of tree you're interested in. You know, what are the atoms of the tree, I guess, you know, is it, I mean, you could view it as a symbolic expression. You could view it as, you know, where the, you know, cells and, you know, it's just cell groups. You could view it, you know, there are others, you know, what are the leaves of the tree? It kind of defines what you mean by viewing a notebook as a tree.
Right, and sorry to interrupt you, but yes, that is the point I was trying to make earlier, that, you know, TreeView just, or whatever we call it, just you know, sits there and facilitates front-end kernel communication and displays the thing. Now, if we wanted to go in and analyze and somehow customize based on the content, I think that would be the tree outline function.
Well, I don't think either of these names is very evocative, but I mean, the point that I'm making is, think about the import. You want to return, quotes, a tree, but one that by default displays in this linear form, or whatever we call it. Am I making sense?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that's an argument for there being an option to tree that determines its display structure, just like, you know, we've got, well, look, here's the thing. We've got a graph layout option, which dramatically affects the way the graph is laid out. Am I making sense?
Yes, but I think I disagree with that, because with graphs, there are still points connected by lines. Well, here, for example, imagine a tree in which the payloads are numbers. You may want a visualization based on rectangles of areas proportional to those numbers. And this is tremendously different, and it will require its own options. So I think it's better to have a function dedicated to the options of that visualization.
Fair enough, but then what would you return? Look, here's the problem. You take in an XML tree from import, okay? Then you want to do operations on it. You don't want to be unwrapping it. You've got the following issue. And by the way, I don't think that these are incompatible. I think one could have an option as well as a wrapper, just like we have for many other kinds of things. But I would say that the idea would be that the import could have set the options so that were you to see the default display of the XML tree, it will be this linear form. Am I making sense? But nevertheless, if you were to do operations on it, you could operate on it like a tree. You wouldn't have to say first to extract it from its display wrapper. See what I'm saying? So what I'm arguing for,
Like Dataset.
yes, I guess so. Well, I guess
Except Dataset actually appears in the language. Well, I guess this would appear in the language, but there would appear as an option as opposed to.
Well, I'm saying that just like Dataset could have its display options set by the importer. I don't know whether that actually happens right now, but it certainly could happen. But yet the thing you get out as the delivered object is a dataset that is capable of being manipulated in all the ways a dataset can be manipulated.
Right.
Okay. So what I'm arguing is that's a reason. Okay, so I would say the obvious thing to do is there is a wrapper function. Possibly that wrapper function should actually return a tree. Like, for example, graph with a new graph layout will, I think, return a single graph with a changed graph layout. Just like show returns a single graphics with changed options and so on.
Correct.
Well, if this is just an option to tree, then it will work like that. You can do tree of a tree and specify new options.
Fine. But then what I'm arguing is there should be a wrapper that essentially whose action is to set those options. But that means that we can return from things like import a tree.
I think we don't need that. We don't need a wrapper that sets the options. That wrapper is just tree.
Well, yes, we do.
Yeah,
I think it's
so I guess the other alternative would be it's just an inert thing that the front end takes care of how it formats.
Yes, I know. But what I'm saying is, I think the flow should be this. There should be an option to tree that specifies its layout. Okay. Then there should be some wrapper functions which are convenient just because you say, hey, I want this tree in this linear form. And that may be a convenient thing to do. You know, rather than, I mean, maybe it's sufficient to just say expression tree, blah, 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 comma, tree layout, arrow linear, for example. You see what I'm saying? That may be a sufficient way to do it. Am I making sense?
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that the only reason it would be useful to have a dedicated function is if there are classes of sort of preset options based on content that you'd want to say. So I don't know, like, calculate, open enough subtrees so that I immediately see 100 nodes or something.
Right,
I don't know if that's
options like that. Yes, but those could be. We've got to have a way of having rich options that are part of the tree layout specification. Whether you give those in a wrapper and they then seep into the innards is a different question, I think.
Right. Well, but right. My point. The point I'm making is, sure, you can manually, if we had these options, right? You certainly, it should be the case that you can manually set on 100 nodes. This one should be open in the initial state. But if you just have the tree and you want some function to calculate which nodes should be open for you based on some criteria, that's where you have value for a function.
I got it.
So TreeOutline, just for context, TreeOutline currently just everything is closed by default. And the second argument is a position spec, and it opens all of the ancestors of those positions so that you can see them. And then there's the third separate thing that Itai is mentioning of specifying which nodes are initially open and which ones are initially closed.
Well, that's kind of like Short. Short tries to sensibly close up things that, where you still see the structure, but there's big things are elided. You can imagine the same thing for Tree. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. And I assume, so another thing is underneath a node, being able to easily say how many things are under that node. Right? Just like we do in the very useful thing that we do in documentation, where each subsection records, and arguably that's the thing that we should make be a front-end option for general closed cells, John.
Is what again? Sorry, I missed that.
Putting the number of elements that are below that closed cell in parentheses after this cell content.
We have something similar to that, which is which was, you might remember this, was on by default in 2.2, was there was kind of a length meter.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that was too analog.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't, it didn't give you any basis for. It was only like relative measurements were useful. It didn't give any absolute notion.
Right, but I think that the idea that I certainly find useful in documentation of saying how many things are there underneath this closed, cell is something we could generalize, but it's something also relevant for trees here.
Yeah.
Okay, but so let's loop back again. Okay, so I think what we're saying is there needs to be a syntax for a pure option to tree, some kind of tree layout, and we have a somewhat rich graph layout, although I'm not very happy.
Which we have a tree layout option.
What does it do?
You can specify different graph layouts, or you can specify top, bottom, left, or right for the orientation of the tree.
All right. Well, then we either need a version of that does this linear layout, or we need a yet separate option, which is sort of the master layout concept. Because the actual existing tree layout option is going to be pretty vestigial in cases where you're specifying this linear layout, right?
They seem different. Like the tree layout option is like options for the tree graph format.
I understand that, but we could easily make it be the case that for some setting of tree layout, it is specifying this linear layout or some other kind of layout, and then has its own separate options for the linear layout, just like for the graph layout, there are, and it's not very elegant and it probably needs to be reviewed, sub options to like, I don't know, layered digraph embedding, root
vertex and
yes.
things like that.
Right. And I mean, I think those are rather inelegant, and probably we do better sort of packing them all into an association when it needs to get rich like that. And arguably, we could do a thing where, where it says tree layout arrow linear, and then somehow that is in a list with an association or something. I don't know exactly how it should work, which can give the voluminous options there. But then the convenient kind of, I just want, by the way, I mean, right now we have a layered graph plot function, which I don't use, but instead, although I should have used it for something I was just trying to do yesterday, now that I think about it, that would have been a good idea. Maybe that's the way to achieve something. Anyway, I would actually like something called layered graph, which basically all it does is it sets, because I do that all the time. I have to reset between, spring electrical embedding and layered digraph embedding and so on, those two. And it will be quite convenient to have a wrapper that simply sets those without having to grunge inside, graph of G, comma, graph layout, arrow, whatever. Am I making sense? So what I'm suggesting here is a wrapper that similarly, succeeds in, switching this to being a different layout of tree, and has a convenient way to give the options for that switching in that outer wrapper function. Am I making sense? But the end result would be a tree with certain options set, which therefore would also work in import, etc., and be able to be manipulated just as a tree. Am I making sense?
Yep.
So now, in terms of what this looks like, and unfortunately, I do have to go fairly soon here, but I mean, I'm sort of warming to this, although I'm kind of. What do people think of the term linear view or linear? I mean, it's a series of lines. It's kind of like a
Plus indentation, basically.
Right. I mean, it's kind of like it's almost like a textual view, except that we can't guarantee it's got text in it. And
I just I fear that linear view sounds too.
It's wrong. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would never have guessed what linear view.
Okay, well,
does.
fine. But what is this? What is this view? Because
somebody in the live stream suggested hierarchy view.
Yeah, but the problem with that is that everything's a hierarchy.
Yeah.
Nested view.
Right. Let's see what this
Indented view. I don't know.
Dan live stream is suggesting OpenerView, branch view. I don't know.
We already have OpenerView, just that it doesn't work on trees. It doesn't digest trees.
Maybe it should.
Well, TreeOutline returns OpenerViews currently.
What? TreeOutline. Wait a minute. This is TreeOutline. Is this an OpenerView?
This is a new design where potentially it doesn't return OpenerViews anymore.
So wait a minute. So
But
right
what
now,
you see
if I run
there,
it
what you're
today-
seeing there with just the triangles, Mercury, Venus, that's what you get currently.
So if I say random tree of 100, for example, oh, for goodness sake.
The compiler is currently broken in 13.1 build, so.
Okay.
That's reassuring for me.
Okay, so there's my random tree. And now I say, what do I say here? Tree outline.
Mhm.
Oh, I see. Well, that's pretty useless.
What is the head of that expression?
Probably
OpenerView.
tree outline. Oh, OpenerView. Oh my gosh. So we can't manipulate this.
Nope.
Yeah, that's a design mistake.
What?
I mean that surely the OpenerView should have been a typesetting step, not an evaluation step.
Right, but I mean, this is not set in stone. These are experimental things as of now.
This is kind of like tree rules. Like this was kind of understood as like a conversion function.
Oh, sorry. I sorry. I thought TreeOutline was a thing that already existed. Okay.
Well, I don't know how.
I'm saying initially, yes. So when we added TreeOutline in 12.3, I was thinking of it as a converter from tree into OpenerView, which maybe is not like you said, maybe that should have been just an inert thing that formats using OpenerViews.
Okay, but so we have a bit of a muddle here on our hands. So I didn't realize that TreeOutline was already an existing thing, although it's still an experimental thing. I have never used it. And clearly your design, the new design is vastly better than the existing thing. What is the relationship between the new design?
And you can see, by the way, one of the really critical flaws in TreeOutline in the ref page there is that it is not easy to tell that A and B are not peers.
Yeah. Why OpenReview not able to support?
You know, there should have been a level of indentation that is not there.
I agree. And Noah added that in the new design. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I was
But
totally baffled by that point the first time I saw a tree outline.
okay, so hold on.
Mhm.
OpenReview, why doesn't OpenReview support this new format here?
Well, I mean, the front end doesn't know anything about trees or data structures or whatnot.
No,
So,
I understand that, but I'm saying that conceptually, this seems like it's perfectly applicable to OpenReview.
So part of the payload of OpenReview is a dynamic variable that tracks the open state. A single dynamic variable that tracks the open state.
Well, that's not good either. Look, we
Right,
have a bit of a muddle here.
yeah, no, right. OpenReview is right. It's a 2-element thing, right? It's
It's just like a control. It's a standard control, like slider and so on.
right. But my point is, it doesn't represent a whole hierarchy, right? This is a bunch of nested OpenReviews, not a single OpenReview.
And columns too.
Fair enough. But I mean, look, this was a quick implementation of this, which is interesting, but I don't know.
But
Okay.
wrong.
Yes.
You don't need to mince words. I think don't think anybody will be offended if you just say it's wrong.
Yeah. Right. Okay. So okay, I have to leave in a moment here, but what we're doing. Okay. So where are we going from this? We got to think through the all these different things about tree layout versus, what goes inside the tree structure, what is an inert wrapper, etc. I mean, I favor things going inside the tree structure and just displaying that way. Displaying according to the option that was given there. I also want to understand, I mean, clearly, for 35 years, 34 years, we've had the whole mechanism, all our lovely mechanisms for outlining in notebooks, right? And my question would be, what can we learn from the UX, which has worked really well, of notebook outlining for tree outlining? Do you understand what I'm saying? Because a notebook outline is a tree outline. It's just a tree outline where the payload elements are typically rather large and where the number of hierarchical levels is typically defined by styles and is comparatively small. Right? Whereas a tree outline of the kind we're talking about could go much deeper. Its levels, I mean, one could imagine something where we would actually want to style every level, just like we do in notebooks, title, section, subsection, subsection. One could imagine wanting to do similar styling on a tree over here.
I would think tree element label and tree element style, like those options for tree should work.
Right, but I mean, one could imagine trying to specifically stay, relevant for this kind of view. The level 1 format is this, the level 2 format is that, and so on. Well, okay. I think we need to wrap up here, but we clearly need to talk more about this. Maybe you guys could have a think about, well, the things we've been saying about putting this as an option to tree and so on. And some of these other things about unification with notebook outlining, unification with dataset outlining, which you have thought about a little bit, unification with short, and so on. Sorry, I mean, this is more complicated than we perhaps thought. I think in terms of the pure UX is looking, for some reason it looks a bit overly precious to me, but just in terms of design, but the functionality is nice.
What? Sorry, what do you mean by precious?
Nobody but
I'm-
Stephen knows.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Maybe that's some Britishism of.
So I've been trying to work it out while you've been talking.
It's a Britishism, but the British kid asked you.
Well,
But
okay.
does it mean
40
that
years
it was
since I lived in
created
that
by
country.
Sauron? So we must call it precious, my
Oh
precious.
yeah. Right. No, gosh, that probably is from. Okay, drat.
No,
What I mean is, it's sort of overly detailed. It's kind of like the, in the skeuomorphic design department of, put, of having things that look pseudo representational or something. That's a bad description, but it's kind of like too much detail, so to speak. Somehow,
I see.
it
I
looks
see.
very.
And so that's
dainty and
why
detailed.
that's why you were pointing out the cell brackets, maybe, because that's less.
Yes,
It's sort of achieving
fragile.
the same thing, but is.
That's a good
Okay.
way to say it. Fragile, kind of like there's a lot of stuff here.
There
But
are
yeah.
certainly versions of this that have less ink, I guess might be a way to put it.
Yes. I mean, clearly this has less ink, but it's also incomprehensible.
Right.
But I think our cell brackets are rather beautiful in that respect.
Right. And
We
no,
have
there are good versions of this with less ink. So yes, we can figure that out.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry. I have to. One thing is learning new words, and the other is realizing that words you use have completely gone out of circulation. Yes. I think I've heard that term in graphic design rather than in American graphic design. It's always very hard to remember when one learned a word. I'm pretty sure I've heard that word in context of American graphic design. So
it made sense to me, but it's one of those where maybe it's just an inside circle of people understand what you're saying.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, okay, maybe a designer word. I don't know. Okay. Maybe American designer words. So Noah is then in a different loop of okay. But I'm glad we clarified that. Okay, well, we should wrap for now, and to be continued.
Okay, thank you.
Good stuff. Okay, bye for now.